Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on the recent content. As always, we're in the home stretch for the NBA standings before the playoffs. So this is kind of like the last time we're going to look at the standings before they're pretty much finalized. And before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yep. So first off, just shout out UConn for winning the NCAA men's national championship, over Purdue, right? I
Back
think
to
that was
back.
the expected result. Yeah, back to back. Klingon and as well as others, right? Maybe some potential NBA prospects in there.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens with Zach Edey. But for today, right? Because we'll save that for the offseason with our mock drafts for today, as you already mentioned. It's standings time, right? The most exciting time of the year, I guess, for the NBA, right? The playoffs, play-in are on the way. We'll start off, I guess, in the East, I suppose, right? Obviously, we already know that Boston has wrapped up the 1 seed, right? They're getting their butts kicked by the Knicks as we speak. But again, they're still 7-3. I guess they'll be 6-4 in their last 10. And they've already clinched the best record in the NBA. They've just played a couple of teams, right, that have a lot to play for because the standings in the East are very much in play. You look at the Milwaukee Bucks for a second. Currently a game and a half, soon I think be a game, ahead of the New York Knicks, right? The Bucks, they won 2 in a row. Giannis unfortunately got hurt in the Celtics game, hurt his leg, right, or calf, had to come out. They weren't quite sure how bad it was. He got an MRI. There's no tear, so that's good. I guess it's just, kind of like calf soreness, or whatever. So that's obviously good news for Milwaukee, right? Or as good of news as you could get, that it's not a major injury. It's not a torn Achilles. It's not a torn calf muscle, right? Which would be basically game over. Not basically, it would be game over because you cannot afford to lose your best player at this point. If you want to if you want to have any hope at making an extended playoff run. And it's kind of weird, right? Because the Bucks have been pretty bad in their last 10 games. They just won 2 in a row, but that was after losing 4 in a row and, pretty much to almost all bad teams, right? They lost to the Wizards, they lost to the Grizzlies, they lost to the Raptors, I believe, as well. And then I think they got blown out by the Knicks, right? So other than the Knicks, the other 3 teams they lost to were all, their seasons are done. So that's not great. Now, within that, there were some guys in and out of the games, right? I believe Lillard missed a couple. Giannis missed one, but you still think you could take care of those teams who were not 100% either. So I don't know. I mean, I guess, it seems like they'll probably end the season, regular season, on a good note because they have to at this point. So I guess that's nice that with the backs against the wall, in danger of falling down the standings. Because if you haven't looked, in the East, the second seed has 31 losses and the sixth seed is 34. So, if you lose the last couple of games, you could be in a real bind, right? The Magic, if they had beaten the Bucks the other night, and if they, beat the Bucks again, they would have the tiebreaker and they could have clinched, a top 3 seed or whatever. But, now they haven't. So, and speaking of which, right, look at the Magic, right? They were 3 a week ago and now they've dropped to 5, right? The Knicks, are now 6-4 in their last 10, 7-3. I guess they're going to be after this, Celtics destruction in Boston. So the East is wild, right? You look at Cleveland, who was the 2 seed for a little bit. They've dropped to 4, right? Obviously, we already mentioned Orlando's at 5. Indiana's at 6. They're 7-3, right? The Sixers, now that Embiid is back and they've got a cakewalk schedule, they've won 6 in a row, 7-3 in their last 10. The one that's kind of the weird one is the Miami Heat, I feel like, because I know they're 6-4 in their last 10. It's kind of hard to pinpoint how I really feel because, like, there are times where I feel like that team is just kind of just chilling, but then there's other times where I feel like the team might just not be that good. And I guess, maybe we can touch through some of these teams individually, but, obviously 7 and 8, 7 through 10 is in the plan, right? The Bulls and the Hawks are pretty much locked into 9-10. But yeah, the Heat, how do you feel about them, right? They just played the Mavs the other day. got crushed for most of the game, made a comeback of it late, but obviously ended up losing by double digits. Um, Obviously Rozier's out, right? And it's just been kind of a revolving door of injuries, and maybe that could be it, where they've just had so many games where like, hey, Tyler Hero was out for a long stretch, right? Rozier was out for a stretch, right? Duncan Robinson's had a back issue, right?
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler's missed time, and as well as others. So I don't know. Like, do you still believe in this Heat team in terms of like obviously they're locked into the 7-8, probably going to be 8. But you know, do you think that they could still pull off the upset? Because I just feel like that's a tall task. If you're the 8 seed and you end up playing the Celtics in the first round, like you might just be drawing dead at this point.
I mean, Miami, I think they have some glaring issues. And we've kind of talked about this multiple times throughout the season where, the I guess the guys on the team, I think they have their limitations at times. You can tell, especially defensively when they go up against some really really high end star power, like you were talking about with the Dallas game. I think when you come across a Kyrie Irving and a Luka Doncic, what can this team really do to mitigate their success? And I think it's a problem when they face playmakers. Because I mean, who can you really throw at a guy like Kyrie? Because I think we saw what Jovic was on him at one point, which is like, okay, I guess you can maybe try that. Then I think they tried Haywood Highsmith, Caleb Martin as well, and I mean, I don't think either of those guys could really stick him at all. And then Doncic, they had, I think, Bam Adebayo on him at times, and that kind of screws over, your paint defense. So, Dallas kind of toyed with them offensively. I don't want to get too Xy and OE or whatever, but like circle traps, if you guys know what that is. But, they were pretty much leaving the paint wide open in the middle and then doubled like any penetration from the 3-point line. So, it's tough when you have like personnel that the Miami Heat do have, but I think you can't really ignore the fact that you have a Jimmy Butler, you have a Bam Adebayo. I think you have a clear, I think, core of guys, but there's only so much adjustments that Eric Spoelstra can make. And I think he just struggles when it is the number one option. I think he struggles to mitigate those guys, but I think when it comes to like supporting cast, I think he can handle that very well because he can kind of quiet them down. But when you have two number ones, I think it's very hard to play against that in general. So I'm not gonna fault them for losing to Dallas too much in that regard, but they just have kind of dropped a lot of must wins throughout the entire season, and that's kind of been the problem with them. The inconsistency is tough. They kind of just stink, and I just don't really know. I think Hero said like it's a must win for us, and we didn't approach the game right. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much what happened. He even called it a playoff game at that point. So if they're dropping games like that, I think there is a serious high level of concern for the inconsistency that they've kind of had throughout the season. So they might be cooked. Who knows? But I'm not as high on them as I was probably a month ago. I will say that.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you where I feel like a while ago they were, because right out of the gate, I think after the All-Star break, they were playing pretty well. Things were looking good. And then, like you said, they've just dropped a lot of games. Again, they've been hurt. They've been banged up. The offense, that's kind of the biggest problem. It's a very just weak, limited offense. And then, even a guy like Jimmy Butler, I feel like has not been as great this season in terms of the consistency,
Mhm.
right? And some of that's been because he's missed some time. Um, the 3-point shot, I guess, has been good, so that's nice. But just in general, like, you know, when they've had so many games, with these guys just in and out of the lineup, and then some of their individual performances have kind of just been up and down, right? Because like Hero was great earlier in the season, then he got hurt, and then he had a stretch where he came back and he just wasn't the same for a while, right? And then Rozier when he first got there was kind of wonky, kind of rusty. And then he picked it up and then got hurt. So,
Yeah. And one more
it's
thing
kind of
about Miami, like I think it is intriguing where their high end talent has been like the lacking part of their roster, which is kind of ironic because I think you're gonna need more from Bam and Butler. I think if you want to kind of replicate the Cinderella magic that you had last year.
and that's kind of when we look back to last season. I mean, that's kind of what it was, right? Because in a lot of those games, like Jimmy Butler was going toe to toe with a lot of different guys. I mean, like he had the crazy games in the first round, against the Bucks, and then you think back to that Celtics series, right? It was Caleb Martin, who went insane. I mean, that was basically a 20-point per game scorer.
Yeah.
alongside Jimmy and Bam in that series. And Robinson had been really good. He's been out as of late with a
Mhm.
back issue. So I think that's kind of the problem is that they've just not had so many games with a lot of their more important players together.
Yeah.
And if they don't get those guys relatively soon, it's probably going to be a wrap because I just feel like you're in the play-in, you're going to play Philly, you're probably going to lose. The first playing game, so they'll probably have to win the second one, and then you're the 8th seed, and then you play Boston. That's not an ideal, I think, situation to be in. Obviously, those two teams met in the playoffs last year, but that was in the conference finals, and the Celtics are a very different team from last year, right? Where they've added a lot of different personnel that wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
Like there was no Porzingis last year. There was no Drew Holiday for the Celtics last year, and that makes a huge difference.
For sure. And like,
And
it is tough because I think, you can look at it on the bright side, I guess. I don't know how much they can move up, if at all. Let me check the standings real quick. I guess
they
they could potentially
but
move up, but they do play
they
the
would
Raptors twice, but they need somebody to lose out. So, you'd have to
right.
pray and hope for that. But, you do have 2 games against the Raptors, which is a lackluster team. So I would consider those must wins. And they should finish strong regardless. So,
Right, because
that's the tough part, though.
even that Hawks game that they won, that went into double overtime,
I
and they had a
know.
couple of stretches where it looked like they were going to lose that game.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just kind of just I don't know, kind of alarming. But
Yeah.
um, then you have the Sixers, right? They're 7. They've won 6 in a row, right? Embiid's
Yeah.
come back; he's been pretty good, obviously. They have the possibility of having a golden opportunity where they might play the Bucks in the first round.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's been some reports that suggest that the Bucks think that Giannis could come back by the start of the playoffs. Um, and if you're Philly, right, you might have to capitalize on that, right? Well, who knows what percentage of whatever Giannis is going to be in? Maybe he'll still be really good. But either way, that's your chance. Where it's like Embiid is back, he's been playing, and again, I don't. People aren't going to pick the Sixers to upset the Bucks, but you'd have a chance. I mean, again, their record is not that much worse than the Bucks. I mean, obviously they're 7th, and the Bucks are 2, right? But they have, let's see, 4 more losses than Milwaukee, and that's with Embiid missing a large chunk of time. So, I mean, if the Sixers can get right, at the right time, and they play the Bucks, they may have a chance to pull off an upset if Giannis isn't quite right. Because they do have a decent amount of talent on that team, even outside of Embiid. It obviously looked horrible while he was out because the team is built around him. But if they can get healthy at the right time, who knows?
Yeah, they pretty
That's
much
like,
had like a 4-0 week. Like they're
yeah,
on fire.
that's the team that I think of the lower seeds probably has the best chance of pulling off an upset.
Yeah, and it's like, for all the gamers out there, I think the 76ers are like a Smurf. They're a really good team under disguise as a bad team or a bad seed, I guess you could call it. But they're very. I think you can clearly see that Joel Embiid like is just different. He's completely turned around and fueled the huge run that they've gone on. And it's been crazy. The jump in the spot is really good. I think they're one of the most, probably, if not the most threatening lower seed, I think, in playoff history, honestly, because I think, they have so much potential and so much star power. Because I think if you look at Maxey and Joel Embiid, I think that would probably be one low seed that you would not want to face, especially if you're a higher seed. And even like with Milwaukee, like it's kind of eerily reminding me of the Miami series last year, where they're potentially not going to have Giannis for a couple of games. I don't know, depending on the health or whatever, how serious it is. But if they don't have Giannis, I think we could be looking at Philly and the Bucks, and I think Philly would potentially be the favorite if Giannis is out, just due to the fact that Embiid's star power. I don't think anybody in the Bucks is going to be able to stop that, counter it, or even match that kind of dominance that Embiid kind of puts on a night in, night out basis. So I'm really looking at Philly as this could potentially be their in for a championship window, but it all comes down to, can Embiid maintain the health, and can they continue to win games?
Yeah, that's really it. If Embiid get you know can get there and stay healthy,
Yeah,
then they might have a chance to pull off the upset. Especially like if Giannis is compromised, at all, right?
yeah,
Because again, That's what this Bucks team is built around. They've obviously won these last couple of games without Giannis. They made some adjustments right now. Patrick Beverly starts as opposed to Beasley, right? I guess, to have a defensive minded guard in there. But
Hmm.
I mean, you're still probably going to have some problems, right? Trying to slow down Tyrese Maxey, who's got, a ridiculous speed and athleticism advantage right over the Bucks guards. They have a lot of pieces, that could potentially help out, right? D'Anthony Melton, I think recently came back. He's been out for a long time with a back issue. He
Hmm.
was their starting guard, before he went down initially. So now you have a little bit more depth. And again, if Embiid can kind of just not get hurt and just stay healthy, which has been an issue for him, obviously, even in the last several postseasons, but like you said, they may have a chance, to pull it off. And, I think they would have a chance. Like I said, I don't think they would be picked as the favorites unless Giannis is out. But there's
Exactly.
been a but there, again, as recently as a few hours ago, right? That Chris Haynes was saying that Milwaukee is pretty hopeful that Giannis will be available for the start of the playoffs. Now, again, hope is different than certainty. Obviously, so we'll just have to wait and see. We'll know obviously about a week or so from now. But
Yeah.
either way, the Sixers I think are the biggest wild card just because
Oh,
again
for sure.
we had enough of a we had enough there before where we saw the Sixers were really good before Embiid went out,
Yeah,
right? It
they're a
wasn't
Trojan
like,
horse, I think. You know.
right, yeah, it wasn't, yeah, we had a good sample size to show that like when the Sixers were, relatively at full strength, they were one of the best teams in the East.
Absolutely. And like with Milwaukee, I know we talked about them already a little bit, but I think there's a high level of concern with Giannis. Like I know initially people thought that was like a cramp and he was being helped off with that, but if it's a calf injury, that could really actually end their season, or not end their season, but kind of squash their postseason dreams and aspirations. Because I'm telling you, if they face Philly, I think they're cooked.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to because it's just interesting because with him out there, right, they were kind of slumping to the finish line. And that injury may have been kind of the thing that like has picked everybody up, to try to play with a lot more intensity and focus because they were pretty bad, because we had talked about it where they had lost 4 in a row. Um, so we'll see. And then Indiana's at 6.
Hmm.
If the playoffs were today, they would play the Knicks, but the playoffs are not today. They are tied with the Pacers. So obviously that could completely change, by the time Sunday rolls around. Um, I guess if you're the Pacers, I mean, would you rather play, the Knicks or would you rather play Cleveland? I mean,
I'd rather play Cleveland, bro.
yeah, I feel like you'd probably rather play Cleveland. I just don't know with the Pacers again. It kind of hinges on again their best player because with Halliburton, he had a stretch where he just was not playing like how he was playing earlier in the year. Right, he's
Hmm.
been better as of late. But you just never know, right? And
Right.
again, like some people might look at the Pacers as sort of like the Eastern version of like Sacramento,
Okay. That's
where it's
valid.
like they're where it's like they can win a lot of regular season games. We just don't know what it's going to look like, come playoff time.
Hmm.
But the difference is that again, if you get the version of Tyrese Halliburton that was closer to what it was earlier in the year, when he was like, first team All NBA, second team All NBA, type guy, like no question, then obviously that changes your fortunes, right? Because then at that point, then you have a guy where it's like, okay, he could be like a top 10 player, in a on the floor,
Yeah.
and he could be the best player on the floor in that series, and that's where it's like, all right, you got a good chance.
Yeah.
Um, and then Orlando, like we said, they were 3, now they're 5. Who knows what's gonna happen?
Hmm.
I just don't trust their offense. It's just kind of ugly. You don't really have like a real consistent go-to guy,
Yeah.
and it's really just from the guard spot because again like Paolo's been good,
Hmm.
but it's like you need another guard, and like they have a lot of guards. We've talked about the depth at the guard spot, but none of them are like go-to offensive guys that you really want, right?
Sure.
Because it's like Fultz, is a fine offensive player, but he can't shoot. Suggs is more like an energy 3-and-D type guy, even though he shot the three ball very well. But again, he's not like a guy that you want like running your offense, leading your offense, as a lead guard, right?
Yeah.
Cole Anthony is fine as like a scoring guard off the bench, right? But it's just kind of how it is, right? Like, like obviously in the offseason, we'll see what they do, but I don't really trust that team in the playoffs right now just because of that. Their defense is great. But I don't know what to expect on the offensive end.
Yeah.
Maybe if they play the Cavs, maybe that might be a matchup you'd feel good about if you're Orlando, just
Hmm.
because the Cavs haven't played very well either. So, we'll see. But man, like
Yeah.
they've blown some games too. I mean, like they lost to Charlotte, right? Was that the crazy Brandon Miller game?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, they lost to Charlotte right at the end. They got crushed by Houston. And those two losses really hurt. It's the kind of a running theme with a lot of these teams, like we mentioned with the Heat, where it's like, man, if you had just won a couple of those games, against mediocre teams, like they'd be right there. They'd be right there with Milwaukee, right? And if you're Orlando, you'd love to have a 3 seed in the East and have home court in the first round, but you know,
Ugh.
probably not. But
Yeah.
even if they did, I just don't necessarily know
I would
how to
feel
feel
better
about.
about them if they were
Yeah,
that high, because
yeah,
this makes me this like plants a seed of doubt in my head. Like now I don't feel that great about them because and this is kind of something that you see with younger teams. They do kind of crack and show cracks under playoff pressure at times, and this final week of the season is one of those weeks where. Some teams actually do fold under that playoff pressure because it is creeping up. But it's they're kind of getting exposed, I think. And the lack of consistency from the guard position at the one, on offense, it's glaring. It's a glaring issue.
Wagner can't shoot anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to him, but like he completely forgot how to shoot. I guess like the one bright spot would be that Paolo looks okay, but like I don't know. Like you're losing to the wrong teams at the wrong time, like right at the end of the season, and that's always a recipe for disaster because I guarantee it's going to carry over into the playoffs. And they were just sitting so comfortably and high, at 3. They had the home court advantage, like you said, and they just folded. They kind of just let it go, bro. It's weird.
Yeah, yeah, it's rough. And then moving on into the West, right? Some big, matchups there, right? We had
Yeah.
the Nuggets and Timberwolves play, right, for pretty much the right to the 1 seed. Whoever won it was gonna get the 1 seed.
Hmm.
And it was the Nuggets, right? They ended up winning that game, right? Towns wasn't back. Obviously, they're saying he's gonna come back, this weekend, right? So that's a big boost for them, right? They, even though they've been playing really well without him, you need him for that extended playoff run. But I feel like with the Nuggets getting that 1 seed, that kind of to me almost all but assures that they're probably going to come out of the West. Obviously, like, you still need to be healthy. The West is very deep. Um, it's gotten a lot better, and I don't really feel like the Nuggets are really like better than they were last year. I mean, I don't feel like they're significantly worse, but again, you still have questions about the bench. Some of them have played pretty well, at times, but sometimes they haven't. And obviously, you need I think at least 2, maybe 3 guys, off the bench to help you out, right? Like, and I think Brown and Watson need to be 2 of those 3, and then you need like maybe one more depending on the matchup, but. That was a big win, right? And they treated that like a serious game. I know that they were kind of saying, "Oh, this is just like another game." Like it clearly wasn't. I mean, it was pretty back and forth in the first half, but you just knew at a certain point that the Nuggets were going to come out on top, and they ran away with it at the end. So they've grabbed the 1 seed. Minnesota, OKC. We'll see who finishes 2 and 3, right? Because I believe Minnesota has the tiebreaker. And Minnesota, they play the Hawks and then they play the Suns, right? And then OKC, I believe, plays the Bucks and then they play the Mavs. So, there's no guarantee that either team wins out. So, that'll be interesting to see. But pretty much now, and we'll get to it, in a little bit. But if you're in the 9-10 spot, you're pretty much like DOA because now if you're in the 9-10 spot, even if you get out, you're playing the Nuggets in the first round. And, that's a pretty rough position to be in. Obviously, I mean, you want to get to the playoffs, you're going to try, um, but then moving on, right? Or unless you want to kind of, go about, talk more about the Nuggets, because again, they've wrapped up the 1 seed.
I mean, congrats to them, pretty much. I guess we've kind of seen this before. We saw it last year. We kind of know the danger that they do pose, I think, in the West when they are fully healthy and the number one seed, because it is intriguing that they were able to kind of retain the health. And that's what the conversation around the team pretty much was for like the past couple of weeks. Like, they were kind of brushing off the one seed battle and, the race for it, but they were kind of emphasizing the health, which I think is interesting to see where their mindset is at, because I think a fully healthy Denver Nuggets team is probably going to the NBA Finals, if not winning the championship. So I think, they've got their priorities right. They know their game. Jokic is probably going to win MVP at this point. And yeah, like you said, they treated this, no matter how they want to say it, they treated this game like it was like do or die. Like, you could tell. Everyone was tryharding, even Minnesota. Like both teams, they wanted the one seed. And I think Denver just kind of clears, and they're just showing why they are the one seed and why they deserve that. So yeah, GG's to the Lakers or Warriors or whoever's going to get the 9-10 seed, because you're pretty much cruise, bro. You're not getting out of there.
Yeah, and then again, we'll see who's in 2-3, and then
Yeah.
4-5 actually is the only ones that are basically locked. I think
Let's
the
talk
4-5
about it.
is not quite locked yet.
Yep.
Depending on who wins out, because they're, I think, a game apart.
Yeah.
But
Let's talk about
4-5
it,
is
though.
our first official matchup. Yeah, so we got Clippers and Mavs, right?
Yeah.
The Clippers 7-3 in their last 10. They lost their last game to the Clippers, where they sat literally everybody and still almost won the game, where they were up for most of that game against a Suns team that was trying to win that game after they got destroyed by the Clippers in the previous game, where what was it, like 30-4 in the first quarter. So
Yep.
the game was basically over 5 minutes in. But yeah, we have an actual series, Clippers Mavs, for the third time, right? Since the first time was in the bubble, right? The 1920 season. The second time was in the 2020-2021 season.
Yeah.
Both times the Clippers won. The first time, I believe, the Clippers won in 6. The second time they won in 7. Kind of wild, right? That this has become like an annual matchup. In the regular season, the Mavs have played very well against the Clippers, and to be fair, they've played them very well in the playoffs. But the Clippers won out both times. But this time around, right, this Mavs team probably has the most, is probably the best team that has been put around Luka. Since he's kind of come into prominence as a player. Right, they have Kyrie, so that's your other co-star, right? Who obviously is as good as anybody in terms of scoring the basketball from the guard spot. You have a real kind of wing in Derek Jones Jr., right? Obviously, not like the best wing, right? But he is a wing. He's athletic. His 3 has been pretty solid this year. Plays hard, right? PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, those 2 have now slid in as starters. That starting 5, since they've been put together, they're 16-2, I believe. And they're I think second in defensive rating. I know a lot of those games were against not so great teams, but still, regardless, last year around this time, right, they were losing those type of games, right? Because we lamented the fact that they had some stinky games last year where they lost to the Hornets, and other teams that they had no business losing to. And then before you knew it, they were out of the playoffs and they tanked their way out. But this time around, could be a different story. The Clippers have kind of stabilized, even though they've had some injuries, right? Kawhi's out, which, I'm curious to know what his availability is, right? Because if he's not available or if he's compromised at any level, then that's pretty much game over from my perspective. If they play the Mavs, because they need Kawhi to be, a number one guy if they want to be able to, get out of that series and make a deep run. Because Luka's going to do his thing.
Yeah.
Kyrie is probably going to play well. Obviously he's had some weird playoff series the last couple of years, but depending on the matchup, right, we know he can play well. Obviously the other guys will be a big factor as well, right, because their role players I don't think are quite as good as the Clippers role players, right? The Clippers outside of Kawhi and Paul George, right, you have Harden, you have Westbrook, right, you have Norman Powell, Terrence Mann, Zubac. So, both teams have the size. We'll see what happens with Lively if he ever comes back. But either way, this should be another really good series. And this one, both series kind of went either way. The first year, I think you thought the Clippers would probably win just because they were the more experienced team. And then the second time around, the Mavs looked like initially that they were going to pull it off because they went up 2-0, then they lost the next 2. and then they ended up losing in 7. But this time around, I don't know, because I know the Clippers are 7-3 in their last 10, but they've been just it's just been so strange, right? Because they also had some really, they had some weird games before Kawhi went out, right? They had that long stretch where they were playing like 500 basketball where they couldn't beat any good teams. So right now I feel like you got to be pretty high on the Mavs. And if Kawhi is, like I said, if he's compromised in any way, that's, I don't know. You might be drawing dead. Obviously,
Yeah.
we don't know because people are generally kind of quiet about Kawhi's availability, but still.
Yeah. And, the fact that it's been, I think it's the third meeting in 5 years between, these teams in the playoffs, I think is very special. I think it's very spectacular. And, in one of those series, I think it was the one in 2021, I think Luka was averaging like 36 points, 10 assists, 10 assists, I think, or something like that. And he was frying them. And I think he's gotten better. Obviously, we all know that he's gotten better. The team has gotten better as well. But I think, the main concern is going to be if Kawhi returns, healthy. That's kind of what's going to turn the series, I think. But regardless, I think it's going to be a must watch. And then also another storyline that people aren't even really talking about, but it'll also mark the first playoff matchup between James Harden and Kyrie, since both were Nets guys. So that's another little storyline, I guess. I guess, the other thing is the Clippers, whether you want to admit it or not, they're kind of loaded on talent. I think, they're a special team. But I'm recently, it's been tough, but both these teams, I think, they have been playing pretty well. I think, Dallas is 9-1, and then the Clippers are 7-3 in their last 10. So recently they've been playing pretty good. But it's just wild that either Luka's going to go home or the Clippers are going to go home once again. And they're not going to make it out of the first round again. So I think the talent that's going to be on display is going to be crazy. I think Dallas has been slept on for sure. I think they're one of the premier powerhouses in the NBA right now, whether you want to admit it or not. Because even if you look at it, Denver's been 19-5. And Dallas has been 18-7 in the West since the All-Star break. That just tells you how strong Dallas really is. I think, offensively, when Kyrie and Luka are on the same page like this and they're dialed in this flow state of basketball, I think it's something very special to watch. And I think, honestly, either team could really challenge the Nuggets, I think, for the Western Conference. Obviously, I think the Nuggets would win, but, I don't think either of those teams are slouches. And I think, it's going to be a bloodbath. But I think this kind of exemplifies this to the best of the ability, because it's the Mavericks and Clippers in the first round. I think it's a bloodbath. There's nothing. Somebody's going home, and both these teams are so talented. That's really all I'm trying to say.
Right.
And somebody's going home, and their season's going to end.
Right. I just need to know if Kawhi's healthy, because
Facts.
if he's healthy, I feel like the Clippers are probably going to be favored again.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like, I think, because people are going to say they have more talent. If he's not, then that's the problem.
Yeah, and the Clippers, I think with Kawhi they'll have tons of defense, but without him, then you start to question, their personnel and what kind of ability they're going to have to stop Luka and Kyrie.
Right. Well, if Kawhi's not available, I don't think the Clippers are going to win.
Yeah, heck no.
But yeah, exactly. Because again, he's their best player. The team is built around him. And then, like you said, James Harden, that's the other factor, because he had a stretch, and I think this probably contributed to why they weren't playing as well, where he was just awful, because obviously we know defensively he's not amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So offense, right, is kind of the name of the game for him. And he was not very good on offense, right? His scoring was down, his turnovers were up, his efficiency was low, and that's they need him to be good as well, right? And that was generally. That was kind of what propelled them, essentially, where it was like when he was playing well, and he was playing like a point guard, right? That was basically what, made them as good, as they were when they had that stretch where they were just winning games left and right. But, it's been a different team, but, they've stabilized since then, even with Kawhi out, which is good because, again, you want to be playing good basketball going into the playoffs, not 500 basketball like they were doing.
Yeah,
for a while.
100%.
And the Mavs had already been on a tear, right? Like you mentioned, 9-1. They've been playing great. Like you said, they've been slept on. They were a team, I think we kind of looked at them as the dark horse in the West, right?
Yep.
Where it's like, if it's not one of the top seeds or whatever, but it's somebody else, it could be them because
Mm-hmm.
they have a guy who's a top tier player. They have a co-star, and they have other guys that just fit around them. And if they get hot, right, they could challenge anybody for the most part.
It's just defense, bro. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, and that starting five, the defense has been better. Again,
Yes.
like I said, I think some of that has been some of the teams they played against, but at the same time, again, that's what you have to do anyways. And it's not like every team they played has been garbage. Like they beat the Nuggets,
Right.
and that was with Jamal Murray. So
Right.
that was a good team, right? That's like the best team in the West.
Yep.
Obviously. So I mean, they smashed Oklahoma City. Although I think those guys didn't start, but still. So
Yeah.
um,
They're
we'll
doing
see.
what
And
they
then,
need to do, unlike some other
right.
teams that we've already talked about.
And then 6 to 10, like you
Oh
mentioned,
boy.
with 6 to 10 is an absolute bloodbath. I mean,
Mhm.
again, a week ago or a few weeks ago, we thought the Pelicans were safe in that 4-5 spot. Then they dropped to 6. They're 5-5 in their last 10. They have won 2 in a row. They had a somewhat surprising win, I think, against the Suns, where they lost,
Sure.
got destroyed in the first game, and then ended up just flipping the script in the second game, where
Yeah.
they ran away with it in the second half. Zion was crazy; he had like 5 blocks. But and then they won, the Portland game, right? Portland is. Let's just move on. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
Sure.
yeah, but regardless, yeah, they're 6, but they're not safe. I believe the Suns, I think, have the tiebreaker, if I'm not mistaken. So if they lose any of their remaining games, right, if the Suns win out and the Pelicans don't, they're going to drop into the play-in,
Great.
which literally nobody wants to do. Obviously, for obvious
Mhm.
reasons, right? If you're 6, right, you're playing either OKC or Minnesota, most likely OKC. Or yeah, because I think OKC will be 3.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see Brandon Ingram. He's supposed to come back the final game of the regular season against the Lakers. So hopefully he can come back and look relatively good because they're going to need him if they want to make a solid run. Unfortunate for them that they dropped 2-6 and that they're not going to be in 4-5, but we'll see. And then 7 through 10, right? Obviously,
boy.
change. But it's Suns, Kings, Lakers, Warriors as of right now, right? Obviously the Suns are 6-4 in their last 10. They had, a important win the last game against the Clippers, where they had to win that game because the Clippers were literally giving them that game. And then they also had another game before that where it was pretty awful, where it was the game, like I already mentioned, was over after about 5 minutes, right? They were
Yep.
down 30-4 with no Kawhi on the Clippers, and everybody on the Suns in that game was absolutely horrid. I think Devin Booker hit like one shot, and then in the next game, right, he went off.
Yep.
It's just so unpredictable for that team.
Yeah.
Even though they won almost 50 games, you just don't know what you're getting. And then obviously the Kings, right? They're 5-5. They've been hit kind of rough, with the Malik Monk, Kevin Herter losses.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, 45-34, that's still cool. But again, their chances I think are starting to get a little bit slimmer just because you don't have as much room for error without those guys. Then the Lakers Warriors, right? It was kind of funny because the
boy.
last time we recorded, I think the Lakers were 8,
Mm-hmm.
right? 'Cause they were half above the Kings, and it looked like they might be able to get into the 7-8. And then what happens, right? AD, unfortunately, not his fault, right? Got hit in the face, no foul, no anything, just like the Warriors game.
Yep.
And then he's out, right? He's out for that game against Minnesota. Well, first off, LeBron was announced as out because he was sick. But you still thought like, okay, with AD, they've been able to win games without LeBron. They're playing Minnesota in LA without Towns. They can win that game. They were up, then he's out for the rest of the game, and then you lose, right? And then it's like, okay, well now you need to win this Warriors game. And then AD's, has headaches and nausea. Not his fault at all. He has to miss it, right? I'm sure he would have played if he could, but he didn't. And LeBron got it out, and they lost that game, which you expect, right? They've not been able to win games without AD. And now they're on the brink of being 10, right? Because Golden State's a half game behind them. They will have the tiebreaker. They have the easier schedule. They have 3 games left. And those 3 games, I believe, are Utah, New Orleans, and Portland, I think. So, whereas the Lakers have 2 games left, they play the Grizzlies, gimme game, and then they play the Pelicans with Brandon Ingram coming back. So that's pretty rough because again, you went from being in the possible 7-8 And if you win that game like last year, right, then you play the 2 seed, which is an easier matchup. But now you're in 9-10, and probably going to be 10 unless things miraculously shake your way. And if you're 9-10, and if you're 10 on the road and you have to win 2 playing games, right, that's already going to be really tough because anything can happen in a 1-game scenario, right? We saw Golden State in that last game hit 26 threes. I think the most efficient 3-point shooting game on high volume ever. They
Yep.
shot over 60% from 3 on 40 plus attempts or whatever. Truly insane, right? Draymond was 5 of 5 from 3 in the first half. So now you're gonna have to win 2 playing games. You're gonna have to have some luck on your side. Doesn't look like Vanderbilt's coming back. Vincent looks like a shell of himself. Not his fault. It's just what happens when you have knee surgery and you've only played 5 games.
Yeah.
So you went from being in 7-8 to now your season could be over in about a week, which is not a great feeling. I'm sure that locker room probably has completely flipped in terms of their mood from, again, right, a really good win against the Cavs to just 2 straight bad losses. Not anybody's fault. It's what happens when you're, without guys. And now, again, your season could literally be over in a week.
Yeah.
And even if you get out of the
feeling so
play-in,
good about them.
yeah, and even if you get out of the play-in, as we already said, if you're in the 9-10, you are drawing dead because you are playing the Nuggets in the first round.
Yeah, it's really a lose-lose situation at this point, and it's kind of funny. Like back to like going to the beginning of the season, like we thought the Lakers would be so much better than what they have been, but I guess there was a lot of leaps taken by a lot of other teams that kind of eclipsed what the Lakers have been able to do. Because I don't think they've been horrible.
Right.
45 and 35 is a great record in my opinion. It's just there's a lot. There's a lot of teams that are better than that, obviously.
And you all, and then go on.
No. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, and then you also have to factor in, this team, right,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how they've been winning as of late is
Mm-hmm.
different from earlier in the season, right? Because remember, the starting 5
Oh,
was
good.
completely different, right?
Yeah.
There was, they had, what was it, Torian Prince in the starting 5, and then it switched into Cam Reddish and Torian Prince, right?
Yeah.
Because Reeves got benched. Then eventually D'Lo got benched. So
Yep.
all 3 of the guys that are starting now next to LeBron and AD were coming off the bench.
Yep.
Just truly insane stuff. Um, and again, like you wish you had some of those games back because we talked about it earlier in the season where they lost some games that they should not have lost. And that's coming back to bite you now because all you need, you just 2 wins, right? Is literally the difference between 9-10 and 7-8. Just 2.
Right. And it's like I
That's pretty
think we
much
both probably can argue that like the Lakers are better than the Kings. Like we know that they're better. I'd rather have LeBron and Anthony Davis and the supporting cast that the Lakers do than what the Kings do currently. But like, you can't argue with the fact that the Kings kind of just took a couple more must wins. And then same thing with Phoenix where, they have all the upper star talent, but they've lost a lot of must wins as well and kind of just got blown off the court because of the lack of defense and whatever the case may be. But then you look at the Warriors and they're fighting, like they've got something to fight for. I think at this point I feel a little bit better about the Warriors, just due to the fact that yeah, exactly, just due to the fact that AD is out. I think without AD, this Lakers team is just a shell of themselves, and that's kind of why we had Anthony Davis getting the end of the season accolades that we gave him last episode. But like, hey, it is what it is at this point. They couldn't stop Draymond from hitting threes. I think that's kind of where you just cut it. At this point, like it wouldn't surprise me if they do end up beating the Warriors in a play-in matchup and then end up getting like the 8th seed or something like that. But like you said, it doesn't matter. You're going to be playing Denver. It's done.
right.
Your season is over.
If you're 8, you're basically DOA. And again, you'd rather be in the playoffs at 8 playing the Nuggets, even if you lose, than
100%.
just not make the playoffs at all. I mean, obviously, in reality, it doesn't really make a difference, but it kind of does. Just because you'd rather be in there, and you just never know. Some crazy injury happens or something, and then before you know it, like last year, right? Where like the Grizzlies, they don't have their bigs, and then you get in there, and you're in the conference finals. So
Sure.
that's why so like they're gonna have something to play for. It's just a matter of just one bad result, right? Where again, AD's out for 2 games, and that makes the whole difference. Because if he was able to play, I think worst case scenario they split, and you could afford to lose the Minnesota game as long as you win the Golden State game. And technically, I guess even if you had lost the Golden State game, like if you had won the Minnesota game, you just stay one win ahead.
Right.
So that's kind of the tough part right there. So and then like you said with Golden State, they're 8-2 in their last 10. They found some good stuff, but again, either way, if they're in the 9-10 spot, it's the same issue for them too. Where if they're the 8
100%.
seed playing the Nuggets in the first round, they're not beating them either, right? I
Hmm.
mean, like I don't think it's gonna be any better because I mean they don't have any real. I know Trace Jackson Davis starts, but he's not going to be able to slow down Jokic. And
No.
even with that, you still have some problems with Aaron Gordon. I mean, like it's just the Nuggets are a better team, even though the Warriors do have a lot of depth. Um, after their starting five, but you know, again, that's kind of the wild thing with the plan is like it wouldn't shock me if like either of those 9-10 seeds somehow won 2 games, right? Because like even with the Kings, like obviously in a 1 game scenario, you'd rather be in 7-8 because like say the Suns and Kings are like say the plan is stays the way it is right now, and it's like Suns Kings 7-8,
Okay.
Lakers Warriors 9-10, right?
Okay.
Like obviously if you're playing the Suns, like it's probably doesn't feel great to play against those 3 guys like in a 1 game scenario. But what if they just I mean, again, we saw them get destroyed by the Clippers in that
Hmm.
last game. Like, you could have a game where like everybody's just awful, on the offensive end, and then they just get lit up on the other end, and then before you know it, then you're in the 9-10. But it's better than being in 9-10 because if you're in 9-10 and that happens, your season is over. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so I guess in the 7-10 spot, who do you actually think is going to come out of it?
That's a good
Because like
question.
I couldn't really tell you because I mean I couldn't really tell you because I feel like of those 4 teams, I guess the Suns probably have the most like offensive firepower,
Hmm.
but then it's like they probably have like the lowest floor of any of
Agreed.
these teams because it's just like I've seen them have like just awful games against like weird teams.
Sure.
Not and again, to be fair, all of them have had bad games against bad teams. Like we saw the
100%.
Kings lose to, what was it, Detroit, right? They got blown out by Detroit, right? The worst team in the league, record wise, I guess.
Hmm.
We've seen the Warriors and the Lakers have some bad losses. It's just like, again, at the very least, like in a close game, like what are the Suns going to be doing? Because we know that in the fourth quarter they've been really bad. Especially if it's a close game, and you just have no idea what they're going to do. And again, chances are at least one playing game is going to be close.
Right.
Because these teams are all like you said, quality teams. But of those 4 teams, only 2 can make it. So which 2 do you think are actually going to get out?
Yeah, if it stays the same, I'd go with Phoenix. Winning the 7-8 matchup. I think the Lakers and Warriors one is a little bit harder to predict, just due to the fact that they've both had, some turbulent and up and down seasons, and inconsistencies. I think, the problem is how long is AD going to be technically out? I don't know what the full timetable is.
He's supposed to be probable for their next game, so that
Okay.
should mean that he should be back as opposed to like questionable. So
Yeah,
that's better.
if he's back, I would say I can't really bet against LeBron and Anthony Davis, especially
Just
going
wear
into playoffs. Would you say no?
just wear some goggles. Just wear some goggles.
Yeah, honestly, like that's the simple solution, and I shouldn't say simple solution, but that's a solution to the problem. But I'm gonna go with the Lakers. I think they're gonna probably turn up the ferocity, but so are the Warriors. It's gonna be hard to limit Steph. Clay, I think, will probably show up. I think you're probably going to look for some other appearances as well. I think, I guess you could hope for a Wiggins resurgence or whatever. I think he's probably going to be one of their X factors, along with Kuminga. But for the Lakers, I'm kind of looking at chemistry. I'm looking at, the advantages that they do have. And I think, they have the size to beat the Warriors. It's just going to come down to execution. And also you need D'Lo to turn up as well, and he can't get
Yeah,
cooked, which he probably
and it's
will.
like,
So that's the that's the hard
yeah,
part. So we'll see.
yeah. When you get Chris Paul blowing by you, it's not necessarily a good feeling. But
Hmm.
it's just kind of hard to gauge between those 2 teams because it's like I know the Warriors are 3-1, but we only saw 1 game where like both teams were at like relatively full strength.
Yeah.
And like because we're assuming that the other Laker guys are not coming back, and they're just not going to be. I mean, Vincent is back, but he's not the same.
Right.
So like we're assuming that like this roster is what it is,
Hmm.
and it's like in that first game, that was really the only one that we saw with both teams at relative full strength. I think Chris Paul was out in that game, but also that was before the Lakers even went with the starting five they have now. They
Right.
were still starting Dorian Prince. And then in the other three games, right, it was like LeBron was out. And then in the next game after that, right, AD, that was when he got poked in the eye and was out after 10 minutes.
Right.
And then in this last game, he didn't play at all. And then LeBron, we didn't even know was going to play until like literally 30 minutes before the game. So it's
Hmm.
like you don't really know what both of these teams like at full strength would look like against one another because and that's kind of the tough part about the regular season matchups, right?
Yeah.
It's like even last year, I think the Lakers won that season series, but we didn't really have any like games where we got to see both teams play against one another,
Hmm.
right? If I'm not, yeah, we
Hmm.
didn't get to see that, right? Like I think there was like a game where like LeBron was out, but then like Steph was out, or like a game where like Steph was there but LeBron wasn't, or like AD was there, like we just and that's kind of the tough part about evaluating like one play-in matchup in these season series, but then you also have to factor in because you left out obviously if you have the Lakers winning 9-10, that means they need to beat whoever lost in the 7-8. So
Right.
are you picking, so does that mean you're picking the Lakers to beat the Kings?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick the Lakers to beat the Kings. I think they match up against the Kings very well. The Warriors do as well. They're gonna exploit the glaring weaknesses, and the Kings I think are kind of like the target for sure because they're hobbled. The Lakers are hobbled as well, but I think the Kings missing those key rotational guys. I'm gonna continue to sleep on them. Like the guy even said in our comments, months and months and months ago, sleeping on the Kings. I see, yeah, most definitely. I think they're gonna be the ones that I'm not high on in this, but I'm gonna take Phoenix and the Lakers.
Right, because I mean it's tough because again in that season matchup, though both of those teams were actually relatively healthy, and the Kings
Right.
won all four and pretty much ran away with all of them. So that's kind of the weird part because in the regular season, it feels like the Kings have the Lakers' numbers, but then like in a one-game playoff type scenario, maybe you feel like okay, the Lakers' talent just has to win out over this Kings team. But the Kings do have some advantages where it's like Sabonis, is a physical guy. He's in a lot of actions that AD is going to have to guard, and again, even though he's not like a rim protector, he does make it tough for AD. And then like Fox, they don't really have anybody to slow him down, right? Obviously, the Lakers starting backcourt is not known for the defensive prowess. Although Austin Reeves has played better defensively, so that's the thing. But then like Malik Monk, he's out, and like he's a guy that also has kind of torched a lot of these other teams. And so they're not going to have that. But then like Keon Ellis has just stepped in and has been, you know, basically like Kevin Herter, but with way better defense.
Yeah.
So that's the other kind of interesting factor there for the Kings, where it's like it's kind of hard to completely just rule them out again, especially in a one game scenario. In terms of the precedents for, like 9-10, I think we had what, 2 9-10 seeds get in as the eighth seed, if I'm
Hmm.
not mistaken, because we had the Pelicans, I think, what was it, 2022, I think, right? I
Yeah,
think
I
that
think
was,
so.
yeah, the one without Zion, the team
Yes.
without
Yeah.
Zion,
Yeah.
they were in the 9-10, and they won both games, and they got in as the eighth seed against the Suns.
Hmm.
And then you had, I think it was the Grizzlies, right, in 2021, right? They were in
Yeah.
the 9, and they won too because they beat whoever they beat in the first matchup. Then they beat Golden State in the second matchup.
Yeah.
So we've seen 9-10 teams do it before, and I don't think either of those teams were favored to get in there at all.
But this is different though. Like these
Yeah,
guys,
but this is
these are like some powerhouses teams. Like in
right.
my
Yeah,
opinion. So.
yeah, exactly. This is different because these are like established stars,
Hmm.
going against each other, and these teams are not like way below 500. Like
Right.
they're above 500
Yeah.
by a significant amount. So yeah, that's kind of the interesting factor there. And then I guess the Heat, they were not 9-10, but they played two playing games because they lost the first one and won the second one. But you had the freedom to lose the first one because you were 7-8. So we'll see what happens. But that's kind of the interesting thing, and it's kind of funny how like all the teams that other than the Kings, all the teams that we thought were going to be right after the Nuggets are all in the play-in right now.
Yeah.
And they're also interestingly enough, primarily led by older guys, right? Obviously, the Clippers is the outlier team because
Hmm.
they're, I think, the oldest team in the league, and they're the 4 seed. Um, But outside of that, right, like all the other ones, right, like the Suns, the Lakers, Golden State, they're primarily led by older guys, I guess, other than what Booker.
Yeah.
But outside of that, right, like those are older teams, and the lesson might be learned that like you can't really coast through a regular season anymore because there's a lot of talent in this league. I mean, you got, what, 550 win teams, in the Western Conference. That's ridiculous, right? Whereas you may only have like 150 win team, this time, in the East.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, yeah, well, maybe two. We'll see.
Yeah.
But either way, um, like that's kind of the wild part. So that's kind of something to factor in where it's like, you know, the play in some ways has been good because it allows obviously for, again, say like Joel Embiid, right? The Sixers fell significantly, but they get to be in the play-in. Although to be fair, they would just be in the playoffs if there was no play-in. But either way, 9-10, right? Like Golden State, LA, they'd be done if there was no play-in.
Yeah.
But then you also kind of wonder, like, if there was no play-in, would there have been maybe a more, I guess I don't want to say serious approach, but just a more focused approach? Because then it's like if you're 9-10, you don't get a play-in. Your season would just be done.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting where we would have expected to see a lot of like younger, inexperienced teams in the play-in, but most of them, aside from a couple, have been teams like this.
Yeah, but like I think the intriguing part is I think you can look at it with a kind of like a foresight kind of thing where I think the NBA kind of saw this coming, where they probably saw the saturation of talent. We haven't really seen it in the East as much, but in the West, like it's clear that there's probably going to be 12 or 13 teams in the next 2 years, I think, that are going to be above 500 and can be, looking for a spot in the play-in, because I think, we have to look at it. Memphis, I think, is going to come back stronger and better next year, so they're going to be a potential playoff team. Houston, they're done pretty much punching lottery tickets, so, they're going to be a competent team. And then the Spurs down the line, too. They're going to continue to get lottery picks and build around Wemby. They're going to be a force to reckon with. Obviously, there's going to be some players and teams that may be like disbanded or whatever and start their rebuilds. But, for the foreseeable future, in the next couple of years, I'm looking at the Lakers and Warriors and I'm like, where do they fit into the equation if Houston does actually take a leap that we're kind of expecting them to next season? And then, Memphis does get that lottery pick. They return to full health and they look as good as they did, last year. Like that's the thing. And I think the play-in kind of opens the door for, the real competition to kind of start before the playoffs.
It's kind of the interesting question where it's like, if you're Golden State or the Lakers, what do you do if you miss, the playoffs? I mean, like, I guess in theory, like, I don't think the strategy changes regardless of whether or not you get in and lose in the first round or you just don't make it at all. But, when you look at those teams, right? Because like with Golden State, like, what's the move? Because, I mean, they're way over the cap. They're going to have to, they can't really let Clay walk because they can't really replace him. I guess they could just say whatever, but I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to re-sign it. Then it's like, what do you do with Chris Paul? What do you do with Kuminga, right? Like, I legitimately don't know what you really do, in terms of like the flexibility of the roster. Because with the CBA, makes it a lot tougher to do stuff. And I don't even know. Like, that's the tough part,
Yeah.
So, I mean, what would you do?
If I was like the general manager for the Warriors, or like that's a question.
Yeah, like if you were
Ooh,
Mike
that's tough.
Dunleavy Jr., and you either miss the playoffs because you lose in the play-in, or you just get smashed by the Nuggets in the first round, or whomever you play in the first round.
Yeah, because you'd have to look at Steph. He probably has maybe 2 to 4, maybe 5 years left, like good years left. And then, you're looking at Clay. Me personally, I think Clay is cooked, although he's played very differently, better, I think, than he was earlier in the season when I was, at his head top and calling him washed and stuff like that. But, I think, organizationally, like they have a tie to him. So you're right. They're not going to trade him. They're not going to just let him walk. So you're going to have to, re-sign him. The problem is they've kind of screwed themselves over with the whole bridging the gap between the two generations. We kind of saw that, and when that report came out, we were like, yeah, that wasn't really smart, and Bob Myers got the heck out of there. So clearly that was not a good move and not a good strategy, because now you're going to have to pay Kuminga, I guess. And then Chris Paul, I think that's kind of dead weight at this point. It hasn't been the impact I think that they wanted. Couldn't really be healthy. And getting rid of Jordan Poole, that was a tough decision, but it all goes back to the CBA because they would have had to have paid him as well, or his contract would have kicked in. Then you're really, really taxing yourself. Draymond, you've got to deal with him. So there's a lot. Like, I think they might have one of the hardest situations like to be in as a general manager, as a contender, I guess, because you do have a lot of things to figure out. I would like the thing is I can't say what I would actually do because it would never happen, but I would get Clay out of there. But that's not going to happen because of the organizational stuff and the ties that they have and the things that he's done for the organization. You can't ignore the fact that he's helped them get all those championships. But
Right.
I would
Like
get rid
that's
of him.
that's the tough part because it's just like I don't know if there's like an easy answer for upward mobility because
Right.
I think you just kinda have to hope and pray that like your young guys just get better to a point where it's like they're really, really good, and that's kind of the rough part because it's like, you needed to nail two of those three picks. And it's like
Missed,
Wiseman,
bro.
Wiseman, that was a huge miss, right? Like he's just has not been very good.
Could have had Melo,
Um,
man. Although, how
yeah,
much of a difference would that have made?
I
But
mean,
still.
he'd have more. He'd have more trade value at
And it
least.
would
But
help you with the bridging the gap of the youth and whatever. I think you would feel better if LaMelo was there, but it is what it
right,
is.
but and then it's like Kaminga's been good, right? So it feels like that one you did good on,
Yeah,
right? Like
that's a hit.
you can't really, yeah, like you can't really say anymore. Like they had to pick Wagner. I guess
Right.
you could say Wagner more ready, but either way, it's like it looks like Kaminga's going to be good.
Hmm.
But by the time he gets to whatever he's going to be, like that's probably it anyways, right? Because that
Sure.
probably isn't going to be within the next year or so. And then even Moody, like who's been good, I think he's a solid player. But there were a couple other guys that I feel like were a little bit better after that. I think Trey Murphy went after
100%.
him, and Alfred Şengün went after him.
Holy.
Like, and I think like again, like Moses Moody is not at all a bad player. He's a quality player. But whatever his ceiling is, like, I mean, again, I think you needed at least two of those three guys to have really high ceilings, and I
Yeah.
think they were hoping that Wiseman and Kaminga would have the highest ones. Looks like Kaminga's going to be good, but you needed two, I think, and that's
Yeah.
kind of the difficulty part. And then, well, I guess you can kind of say your piece then before we get into the next part.
I mean, it just happens. Sometimes you see that.
Yeah.
I think,
Drafting is hard.
yeah, and I think the intriguing part is like sometimes good teams when they do have bad years or injury riddled years, they tend to draft somewhat poorly because they're kind of drafting off a fit, not really looking at the future wholeheartedly. You're looking for rotational guys, and they're kind of using that same mindset that they would normally if they were in their contending year, where you're looking for a lot of high ceiling guys, or, you're not looking for a lot of high ceiling guys. You're looking for a lot of impact guys, maybe like 3-year college guys, but that's not what you need. You need guys with like untapped potential, like unlimited potential, because that's the point of having a high draft pick. And, you're just selling at that point. Because I think, Wiseman, at the time, you can look at the pick and you can be like, yeah, he was supposed to be, one of the next big men, like, up. But the sample size, the glaring issues were there, and they kind of just ignored it and went off a fit. So, that's kind of what happens. But they messed up, and it's clearly coming back to bite them because, now you have to pay all these people. So.
Right. And then, when you factor in LA, like, their path is kind of weird as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't have quite as many CBA issues as Golden State does,
Mm-hmm.
but you still kind of wonder. Then it's like, okay, well, LeBron is not 36 like Steph; he's going to be 40.
Right.
Then you have AD, right, who's 31. I guess he'll be 32. Who's still very good, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
right? So those two guys are still really good. How much or how many more seasons is LeBron going to have as a high tier player? We don't know. I mean, you would have assumed by 39 he would have already kind of not been really that great anymore, but
Right.
he still is. So,
Right.
And it's like, I feel like you have a solid group of guys around you. But then you have to factor in, like, are all of them going to hang around? Because, like, D'Lo has a player option. What does he do with that, right? You assume he opts out. But is another team going to pay him a ton of money? Like, I don't really know. I know there's a lot of people that like assume he's going to opt out and get a big deal. I don't know. Because how many teams? Because again, he's in that tier where it's like, he's a solid player, but he's probably not like if I'm a contender, like, am I like, are we a D'Angelo Russell away from being a title team? Probably
Right.
not. Like, he works there just because of you already have like LeBron and AD, so you're probably not just going to be able to have like a superstar point guard next to them since they already make a ton of money. But on some other team, right, that may not work. And then it's like, if you're LA, obviously if you don't make the playoffs at all, like if you lose in the play-in, or even if you get smashed in the first round, we already know they like stars. They're going to be star hunting. We've heard the names out there. But then the only question is that then you kind of go back into the trap of 3 stars and maybe not much else. And can you really build a team around that? Like, because, the Suns have tried to do it. We'll see how it looks in the playoffs, but so far, I don't really feel like that's like a huge success.
Yeah.
The Nets tried to do it, but they couldn't stay healthy, and then they just completely imploded. So, who knows? I mean, like if you were them, what would you do?
Yeah. I think, with the Lakers, the era of the big three, I think, is kind of over. You can look at Phoenix and you can see it's not working. There's glaring issues. And not even like outside of like the play style of those three guys. I think we're talking more so about the rest of the roster and how it does lack a lot of cohesiveness. But like with the Lakers, I'm looking at a couple of things. First of all, I'm wondering, is LeBron? This is a crazy question because we all know the answer, but is LeBron worth the investment of him retiring as a Laker potentially? I would say yeah. And the number one thing you'd probably have to do in order to retain LeBron is draft Bronny, even though he may not be, NBA ready at this point. My other question would be like, once LeBron retires, then what? Because you're going to have to deal with AD. Is he going to want out? Is he going to go somewhere? And the thing with D'Lo is I don't think any team in the NBA is probably going to take a flyer on him. Any sane team in the NBA is going to take a flyer on him. And that's not an insult. It's just like if he's asking for a crap ton of money, I just don't know what team would have the cap space and where that would work and where that would fit for his career. I don't think he wants to go to a team that's rebuilding. He wants to be on a contender. What other contender would really want to keep D'Lo or even try and attain him? I think it would be the Lakers. I think, he would probably stay in and not opt out or whatever. But, it's tough because I think, they're both situations are rough because you have to deal with so much. LeBron brings a lot of attention. And like I said, I just don't think that you can really target a third star. I just don't think it would work because you're going to have to give up, I think, a lot of pieces. Probably a lot of rotational pieces that would have to work because I think you would have to potentially give up either a Rui, a D'Lo, or Austin Reeves. I don't think you would give up all three, but two of those three guys are going. And
Well, contractually, it may have to be all three.
Potentially, yeah. If we're thinking about the same guy, like if it's like a Trae Young or a Donovan Mitchell or DeJounte Murray, like that's a lot of money. So and you're gonna have to give up picks. Is it worth digging that hole? Who knows? And then you'd also have to work on keeping LeBron because is that third star going to be enough to keep him, or does he want to play with his son because potentially 40 years old is enough for him? Who knows?
Right. I think it just kind of depends on like if he tells them I'm gonna resign, then they'll probably, look to do whatever they need to do and kind of just base it off of him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because like that's kind of the thing where like the communication is probably gonna have to be important because it's like if he tells them I'm gonna resign, however many years he can get or whatever, then they can pretty much focus in on all right, we know that we got him for like, 2-3 more seasons or whatever.
For sure.
So we don't have to worry about like, okay, what is this gonna look like in whatever because we know he's gonna be there.
Right.
But
what stipulations are going to be included in that, though?
Right, yeah, it could be like, yeah, he might be like, all right, I'm gonna stay, but you might have to get rid of Darvin Ham and replace him with somebody.
That's
Who knows?
valid.
Right, and that's kind of and there was like a report going around, right, that was kind of saying something along the lines of like, that I think maybe earlier in the season they wanted to a lot of the players wanted to get rid of Darvin and have Handy coach the team. And it's like, hearing this now, right
Oof.
in the midst of like, when they're playing relatively obviously they just lost the 2 games, but like, hearing this at this time when they're playing a lot better than they were in the season, right? Like, that's the other thing, right? Because like, for Ham, right? If they don't make the playoffs, he's probably gone. I mean, maybe he's not because we don't know what the Lakers front office is going to do. But I would feel like significant changes would need to be made if you don't even make the playoffs. I would say just because it's like it's more than one thing. If you don't, if you're the 10 seed and you don't make the playoffs, there was more than one issue with the team. Besides like the coaching, which hasn't been great, but it's not like the only issue with the team. Like it's just
Right.
it would be hard for me to say like, okay, like if you had a better coach, like you'd be a 1 seed or like a top 3 seed, like maybe, like because obviously they made some terrible mistakes, but there were also just other things that didn't go their way, right? Like again, you were counting on 2 other guys to help you out. They didn't play at all. Admit some of the bad decision making because we've talked about that ad nauseum.
Yeah.
And then I guess for like the Kings and the Suns, like, what do you do if they miss?
Hmm.
Because I mean, like,
It's
I
tough
think
too.
there was like because there was like some thing that was going around about like Frank Vogel's job security is on the line, and if they miss the playoffs, he could get fired. Which I don't know if I necessarily buy that one.
No,
I
I
feel
don't.
like that one might be more of like I could be wrong. I feel like that one is a little bit more of like a smokescreen thing. We know that the Suns ownership is pretty aggressive when it comes to making deals and whatnot, but I don't know about that one. Like
Yeah.
like I know he's not been amazing, but I don't feel like that it would be his fault. I just feel like a lot of it is the limitations of the roster. It's like kind of what happens when you have 3 guys who don't always play. They've been, Durant's been pretty durable. Booker hasn't missed a crazy ton of time. Beal's been the main guy that's missed a lot, but all 3 guys together have not played but so much. And when they played all together, it's been fine, but I don't think it's been quite as ideal as what you would have thought. um, so like, and again, they're in the 7-8 spot. If they lose 2 games, they could be out. So like, what would you do if they miss? And they don't have a much flexibility either because they have a super expensive roster,
Yeah.
basically no. Grayson Allen, right? Isn't he going to be a free agent, right? I'd imagine he probably gets somebody to pay something for him.
Yeah, he's been
Um,
great this season actually.
so yeah, so I mean, what would they do?
Um, that's a tough one because they need to target depth. First of all, you need to address the point guard position. I think Booker has done a great job. But I just don't think there's enough stability there. So I would target a free agent point guard and maybe give up Grayson Allen. Not like give him up, but like let him walk or something like that. But you would need to just target depth, in my opinion, because I think you're already in way too deep. With Beal, Katie, and Book. I don't think you can move on from either, like any of those guys, because you're just in too deep. Maybe if like Durant asks out, because I know he was not happy earlier, but I don't even know what that would look like and what kind of return and who would even really be looking for a KD at this point. Not to say like he's bad or anything, but that's a lot to invest in, and I'm sure the Suns would be asking for the farm and everything. So I'm not sure outside of depth what they could really look for. I think coaching is fine. But you just in a real center potentially, I think Nurkic is not really it. I guess sometimes he's okay, but defensively he's just not it. And I think this team is lacking some defense. So I guess I would be like, yeah, address defense and depth for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and then
But you don't have any money.
yeah, that's the issue. So like you're gonna have to bank on minimum contracts, or like you said, maybe you trade somebody who knows, right? And then like the Kings and Pelicans are kind of in a different spot, because those are younger-ish teams. So I don't think you necessarily have to like, you don't feel the same way about them. If I mean, obviously it wouldn't be good, but like you
Yeah.
don't feel quite as catastrophic about them being out of it versus like the other teams. I guess you'd be disappointed with New Orleans and Sacramento, because I guess Sacramento was in the playoffs last year. But like, there's not quite as much urgency with those groups, I don't think, just because of the age of the guys on the group in the
Yeah.
group. So
Yeah, and with Sacramento, I feel like they're a star away from, I think, being a top 4 seed consistently. It's just like you're in no rush. And I think that third star will come around, whether it be through a deal or even like, through the draft, or a trade or something like that. Maybe even a free agent. But who knows? But I don't really think the Kings are in like a pressing time because they just made their first playoff appearance in a long time. Last year. So I think at this point we kind of know what they are. I think they're more of along the lines of like first round exit yearly until they do get that other piece.
Yeah, because I just feel like with the group they have, I think there's like a pretty defined ceiling there where it's like you're probably not going to be able to win more than one round,
Yeah,
at best. So,
exactly.
yeah, that's kind of where we are, in the standings. Again, by the time we get to Sunday, obviously because we're going to record on Sunday, right? That'll be the last day of the regular season, right? So by the time we record, the records will all be finalized, and then we'll have the play-in, and then that will kind of determine, who finishes things out. Because again, like it's been a wild ride, in the regular season. A lot of stuff has happened, um, in regards to what we thought and what we hadn't expected, right? Because there were things that happened, that took us by surprise pretty much everywhere. So,
Mm-hmm.
and and there's again, and like there's a lot on the line because we kind of talked about it with some of these other teams where it's like, even some of the playoff teams if they don't get it done, right? Like if say like the Celtics don't get it done this year, or say like if Cleveland disappoints in the first round again, what happens with them? Like so,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff at stake for a lot of these other teams as well. And we'll have a much more clear and defined picture of it, I think, by Monday, because that's when the season will be over and we'll be able to kind of look at everything
Yeah.
in a clear picture, because there's still a few games to be played and still a few spots to kind of be cleared up before we get to the playoffs.
Yeah. And we'll be looking at all the potential or not potential, but all the solidified matchups once they are, locked in. And we'll also be live streaming pretty much after every single notable game, that does turn the tide in either conference and things like that. But yeah, it's been a wild regular season. I think this has been one of the most entertaining, funniest, I think also innovative NBA seasons that I think we've seen, in our lives because, I think there was a lot of newness and I think it helped the game in a positive way. And I think also it helps that the new generation is kind of taking over. Like you talked about when we were talking about the play-in, the old dogs are kind of at the bottom, and that's not because they're bad. It's just because the new generation and the new talent has arrived and they're kind of showing us what they've got. I.e., the MVP race. So, tons of stuff to be excited about. And I think the postseason is going to be potentially even better than the regular season.
Exactly. And there's, again, few things to kind of, clean house on, right? Mark Stein. There's a lot of belief where Mitchell could be traded if both sides don't agree on an extension, which I think, is kind of obvious, right? Where it's like if they can't agree to something, then they're going to trade him so that way they don't lose him for nothing.
Yep.
Who knows where he goes? Seemed like it might be New York. I don't think that makes as much sense anymore. Just because I don't think you need the small backcourt.
Yeah, I'm in love with the juice and the Mary
talent.
I just pull up
But I kind of like what they're building right now, and I feel like they're kind of like maybe another piece away, from maybe potentially being like right there. Not that they're gonna beat Boston, but you know what I mean. Like I think they're another upgrade away from like being like a perennial. They could make the conference finals.
Yeah, I would think like they need an upgrade at the forward position potentially. Although
Right.
what they do have, I think is good. It's just lacking in consistency, and I also think you need Mobley to actually be able to shoot the basketball from the
You're
perimeter.
talking,
Yeah.
you're talking about. I was talking about the Knicks. My bad.
Oh, okay. Well, if we're talking about the Knicks too, I think they're also in a good spot.
Right.
They're a piece away. I think they're a move and a Julius Randle leaving away, from potentially being, a really staple, team. It's just because I think Brunson has elevated his game to places where we didn't even really think was possible a couple of years ago. So that's I think the bright spot. And then also all the acquisitions that they had, around the deadline and before. Great stellar acquisitions. It's just, we need to, I think, get a move on with the Julius Randle thing and acquire another star.
Yeah, and I think with the Cavs, I think if they do move Donovan Mitchell, like if they can get like a okay return, like I think they'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously Mitchell's their best player, but like, we've seen those young guys, play, before they got Donovan Mitchell, and they were able to win a decent amount of games. That what did they win? I mean, I guess, Allen went down, then they ended up falling in the standings or
Yeah.
whatever, in the play-in, but still like, if they could get something back for Mitchell, like if they could get some like decent role players and maybe like a pick or some or two or something like that, like they could still possibly be like a playoff. They could still be a playoff team. You would just have to bank on the improvements of the young guys, and it just may be a little bit easier. For them, like with Garland, he would have the ball in his hands more and play like a regular point guard. As opposed to like having to kind of share the ball sort of with Donovan Mitchell, and that's not to take anything away from Mitchell. It's just it may be better, for them to part ways potentially, especially if again they come up short in the postseason again,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like it's probably just clear that it's just not going to work.
Yeah, and it's an awkward duo. I'm glad you kind of brought that up because, like, if you look
Yeah, we
at
talked about it last year.
yeah, if you look at it's so awkward. I think the front court is awkward, and all the guard room is awkward, or the back court is awkward as well. At least in the starting lineup, because you've got Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, two very different players, but small guards, not really great defenders. Donovan Mitchell has the athleticism. They both can shoot. Garland's playmaking is elite, but like Garland, I think for him, if you want to get the best out of Garland, he has to have the ball in his hands like the most because he has to be the primary playmaker, probably arguably the primary scorer. Donovan Mitchell, same thing. And then if you look at the front court, it's rough. Neither of them can shoot. Jared Allen can't shoot. Evan Mobley at times can shoot, not really. So it's awkward. I think it has looked better, I think, this season, but
Maybe
still,
Jared Allen is better.
yeah, exactly. But still, like, I think you're a wing away. I think an elite wing, either that or get rid of Donovan Mitchell, get back the role players like you were saying, and kind of have Garland run the show because I think there's a potential upside with Garland.
Right, yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That they may have to do in order to get to where they may like to go. Because again, inevitably you're going to have to pay Mobley, as well, and then you're going to have a super expensive squad, right? With Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, and Allen all basically making max money, and that's just I don't think going to be a sustainable group.
That's why you have to look at the OKC recipe because I think it's beautiful. Where you've got J-Dub, who's been insane this season. You got Chet and Shea. Obviously, you're going to have to pay those people down the line, but it's better to have this kind of success right now than, when that bill is due.
Right, yeah, and that's the tough part, because the Cavs guys, other than Mobley, they've already been paid, So I guess Mobley maybe he doesn't make quite as much as you would have thought because it doesn't seem like he's going to be like on an all, NBA roster or whatever.
Right.
Or the All-Star list, so he's not going to get whatever
Right.
accolades he needs. Was he all defense last year?
Not sure, but he could have been. I think he's a great defender.
Right. So yeah, because if he was on one of those, then that would be how he would be able to get. I think that's how he would be able to get it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was all defensive first team last year.
Yeah.
So yeah,
He's
so
the
he
second
made- so he-
youngest player in NBA history to make an all defensive team. That's fire.
So
He's always
yeah,
been a
that's
great
what I-
defender. Like
that's what I
Gobert-esque defense.
Right. So that's what I thought. So he may be able to get it. Who knows? I don't know how much money he's going to get. So we'll see.
Yeah.
And then moving on, according to the Ringer, Kevin and O'Connor, the Lakers are expected to keep their 2024 pick. Obviously, if you remember back from the AD trade, right? A lot of moving parts to it. Basically, the Pelicans have the option of either taking this year's pick or next year's pick. So they believe that they're going to take next year's pick, which I think
Smart.
makes sense because I think this year's draft is not quite as good. And I think if you're New Orleans, you're probably banking on, okay, LeBron and AD basically both played 70 games this season. Are they going to do that next season? And if they don't, right, then obviously that's probably going to make the record worse. And also next year's draft is just going to be better. So, I mean, I think that's kind of the thinking there. I think that's the thought process there where it's like you assume that those guys probably don't have back-to-back seasons where they play 70 games. Maybe they do, but They might not. And then if they finish in a similar spot, then you're going to have a decent pick in what should be a much better draft.
Yeah, 2024 draft is interesting. I think it's polarizing. You know, you've got a lot of players that are kind of where they're going to be probably for the rest of their careers at this point. You know, in their youth, which is kind of wild. You have some standouts, but I think, you know, considering where the Lakers pick is going to potentially be, I think it's smart to, you know, keep this one. So,
Right. Yeah, and then from the Lakers' perspective, if you get to keep your pick this year, then you can use it in a trade potentially. If you're going to use it for whatever, right?
yeah,
You know, which I thought they were going to do last year and they did not. Yeah, we already know how that one went. So.
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. And then last but not least, Nets don't want Ben buyout. Brooklyn has given no indication Simmons won't be on roster next year. New York Post. So, I mean, he's in the last year of his deal. I mean, I guess if you're Brooklyn, does it even really make any real sense to buy him out? I mean, like, there's
No.
really no point. I mean, like, I guess you might save money, but their roster is no longer like as expensive as it was before. I don't think so.
No,
You're
not at all.
not deep in. Yeah, they're not deep into the luxury tax like they were when they had Durant and Kyrie, and Harden on the team. So
You're right.
I mean, it's been rough for him because again, he hasn't really played, hasn't really been the same guy when he's played. So, but either way, like I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to buy him out. Like just I don't know. You might as well just ride it out, and then when the contract is up, then just go from there. See
Yeah.
what happens with it.
Yeah, you made the move. Might as well stick with it because you're not going to get anything, you know, out of buying him out. I just don't really see that happening. Like that just really wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to me. That's like that's losing money or losing more money than you've already lost with the project. So it is what it is. I'm holding out hope that he can make a comeback, but it just doesn't really look like it's going to happen, unfortunately.
Just hasn't.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on the standings race. Still going down to the wire, as we already talked about. Right, the NBA season concludes on Sunday, right? So by the time you watch, the next episode on Monday, the regular season will be over, and the play-in will begin, I believe, on April 16th.
Yep.
Right, and obviously we've already talked about it. Right, we're gonna be doing live streams after the play-in games. After the night of the play-in games are over, right? And we'll be discussing those teams, and who won, who lost, and where those teams go from there. So join us if you're able to. Again, continue to like, comment, and subscribe. If you leave a comment, we'll pick one and read it at the beginning of the episode. We haven't done it recently, so that lets you know you should comment. And we'll see you Monday.